Welcome. You're listening to Literacy Now, the official podcast for the nonprofit organization Parents for Reading Justice, and I am your host, Brett Tingley.
Reading matters. How we teach it matters even more. Without equitable learning opportunities, students get left behind, left without the ability to advance their skills and unlock their potential. It shouldn't be that way. IMSE exists to change that, and we won't rest until we do. With decades of experience rooted in the science of reading, IMSE has long been the educator's most trusted ally. We refine the best of structured literacy and Orton-Gillingham to equip educators with the knowledge, tools, and support they need to make a difference in the classroom for every student at every age and every stage. Literacy success is possible through superior training, tools, and support. Learn it better, teach it better, until every person reads. IMSE.
We are very excited today to have Kim Lockhart, or Mademoiselle Lockhart, with us here today. She is a Canadian French bilingual immersion teacher and special educator in Kingston, Ontario. And I follow you on Twitter and love it. And one of the things I really love is the Ontario Human Rights Commission and the ban of 3Qing. So I want to hear all about that. But is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience about your background before we get started?
Well, I think it's really important for anyone listening to know that I am just a teacher. And I am not a researcher. I am not some magical person who has anything magical that I am doing in my classroom. It's simply just changing my approach to reading instruction. And I think we have this belief that sometimes special education teachers are these magical people who can sometimes and sometimes not get kids to read. But really, the magic is in the instruction. And so if we change our instruction in the whole classroom setting, then we're going to have fewer kids being referred for spec ed and reserving the spec ed limited spaces for those who truly need it and not for children who aren't getting the instruction. So sometimes I see students in my classroom, especially, as a special education teacher throughout all the grades, who just really need that explicit, systematic instruction with lots of repeated practice and lots of opportunities to practice. So we really need to remember that I'm actually not doing anything that a regular classroom teacher can't do. It's just taken me a long time to get where I am today.
That's something that's interesting because when I was looking at your bio, I thought, my God, you have lots of really, really good training. And I run into I'm always interested in how teachers, if they have found the science of reading or structured literacy, or did they actually just learn it from the beginning? Every once in a while you run into somebody who kind of learned it from the beginning, but that's very rare. So what was your path to structured literacy?
So I was not one of those lucky people. I was not somebody who received this in my undergraduate degree. And I was in a unique situation because here in Ontario, Canada, we have a program called concurrent education. So I actually applied to my teacher pre-service training program from high school. And so you have two streams here in Ontario, Canada. You can do concurrent education, which is at the time, I'm showing my age here, it was a 5-year teaching program, and now it's a 6-year teaching program. Or you can do consecutive, which means you do your undergraduate degree in anything of your choice, and then from your undergrad, you apply to Teachers College. I had very good high school marks, and so I wanted to get into Teachers College as soon as possible. So I actually did Teachers College for about 5 years. I had a course every year during my undergraduate degree, and then I spent a year entirely at the Faculty of Education. Unfortunately, despite the fact that I was in, at the time, a world-class education program, I never received this. And so you would think being in what we had was the most intensive education program, pre-service program possible, I still didn't get it. So when I became a teacher, I learned very quickly that I didn't have what I needed. I didn't know what I needed to know to teach kids to read. So I went on to do my master's. And really, my master's is what tweaked my curiosity in a different approach to reading. But I'll be honest, I didn't learn everything I needed in my master's. I learned the research. And so I was reading article after article after article. And I was building my background knowledge. I was building a toolbox of understanding how the human brain learns to read. But that didn't necessarily transfer into working with little 5 and 6-year-olds in a very busy classroom of 28 kids. And so I needed to figure out, how can I get what I know about how their human brain learns to read, and then what does it look like in classroom practice? So that was the catalyst for me to do my Orton-Gillingham training. And the Orton-Gillingham training really was the how. So I did a 5-year pre-service teaching degree, didn't get what I needed. I did my master's. I got a little bit, so I knew what the kids needed that I wasn't teaching, but then I needed the how. And so it really has been a long process. And then honestly, once you have that background knowledge, it's like what Natalie Wexler says, knowledge is like Velcro for new knowledge to stick to. So every book that I picked up, every article that I read, I knew what orthographic mapping was. I knew what the word grapheme was. And it was just building on that background knowledge. And now when I'm presenting to other teachers, I really have to be cautious and thoughtful about my approach, because I have to take myself back 12 years. I mean, I started my master's, well, not 12, sorry. I started my master's in 2013. I didn't know what a grapheme was. I didn't know what a phoneme was. I didn't know the word dyslexia. And so I have to be careful of the vocabulary I use and not make assumptions. Just like in the classroom, we have to be careful of the vocabulary we use, because we don't want the vocabulary we use to interfere with the children's comprehension. And we have to take that sort of same approach with our teachers in pre-service training programs too.
Were you able to go back to your master's degree or your undergraduate college? One of the things we encourage teachers to do is to give them feedback and to say, now that I'm out in the real world trying to teach kids how to read, we missed some things, and we want to help you improve what you're doing for pre-service teachers. Have you ever been able to give them some customer feedback, and maybe they can?
I encourage current teachers, we call them faculties of education, and we also call them teachers college, but it's not, our definition in Canada of college is different than your definition of college. And so when I say college, typically that is attributed to like very hands-on, sometimes the trades, but it is actually a university degree. And university degrees are usually very academic, very theoretical. But teaching is hands-on. It's hands-on. And so when I went to university, I learned the theories. I learned, but I didn't learn the practical side that I needed. We need both. We need both. And I really do think that is something that is missing here in some, but not all, faculties of education. If we are hiring, often we are hiring professors with a PhD, but who have never stepped foot in a classroom themselves. So I'm learning from people who have read a lot of great journals and have read a lot of books, and they've applied for funding and they've done a lot of research, but they've never had to apply it. So that's very difficult for teachers to do on their own. And I often equate things to the medical system, because my parents are both pharmacists, and it's really interesting to hear their perspective on things, because they're blown away that in education, we haven't been using the science. And why aren't we using the science? It's there. It's not a good use of our time hearing each other's philosophies and belief systems when the science is being siloed and not being shared. And so I think in our universities, we have to remember that teaching is both an art and a science. And we have to know the research to inform our instruction. But then the art comes with knowing your students, knowing their interests, but that can't replace knowing the science and what has to be taught. It has to be both. It's like Christopher Such's amazing book, The Art and Science of Teaching Primary Reading. We need to have both. And again, it's like in the medical system, we want a knowledgeable doctor who knows the most current research, but we want them to have good bedside manner too. And my parents as pharmacists, they had to be knowledgeable about what medications interacted. If their profession was based on a belief system, they could say, oh yes, Mrs. Tingley, you can go on this medication, let's fingers crossed, everything goes as normal. But, sometimes they would get on the phone and say, Dr. So-and-so, I don't know if you know or not, but Mrs. So-and-so is on blood thinners and this could be fatal what you prescribed, right? And so we want to make sure that we are not using practices that harm children the same way in the science and medical profession, we're not using things that harm our patients. And really understanding that when an approach isn't working, we need to change our approach.
I couldn't agree more. I'm an engineer and an MBA, so my whole background is math and science. And so this is like very foreign to me. It's interesting, but it's unfortunate. But now something that's interesting to me that you're saying is that in the US, most colleges of education, it's the exception that our teacher prep programs, whatever you want to call it, are teaching the science. You're saying that many Canadian teacher prep programs do teach the science, but they don't teach the implementation.
Parents for Reading Justice is a nonprofit grassroots movement dedicated to ensuring every child learns to read by engaging parents and educators in adopting the science of reading. Please watch our award-winning film, Our Dyslexic Children, take our masterclass, and to ensure all our services remain free of charge, please consider making a donation today, all at parentsforreadingjustice.org.
No, I don't think they're doing they are using research-based information, but sometimes it is maybe not based on the cognitive science that we need, or it's not based on the neuro-linguistic science that we know. They're pulling from maybe certain fields of research that aren't necessarily the mechanics of how the brain best learns to read. It's based on this idea that immersion alone is going to be enough to help a child learn to read and help a child learn to write. And so I was never taught the mechanics of teaching students to read, nor the importance of phonemic awareness early on. And I was never told that phonemic awareness instruction can actually help prevent some reading difficulties from happening. That would have been really helpful. If someone had said to me, Kim, every day you need to make sure that you are practicing retrieval practice, lots of explicit instruction on blending, segmenting words into their individual phonemes to prevent some students from floundering, I would say, okay, I'll do it. Nobody told me that though. And so it's not just a wait to fail approach for students, but we truly are taking a wait to fail approach for teachers too. We are letting teachers flounder. And so many of the sayings that I hear, like the wait to fail approach being one of them for students, I think, no, we're not setting our teachers up for success either. And in order to set our students up for success, we need to train our teachers and set our teachers up for success. But we can't set our teachers up for success until the teacher training changes.
Well, and we are very actively working with the parent groups that we mentor and work with to organize their districts, to talk to and provide feedback to the teacher prep programs that they get their candidates from or that they allow to student teach in their district. Because that is a different, I can take Louisa Motzen foremost authority on reading instruction and say, you should do this. And they'll say, my PhD says no. Yes. But if you go in and say, we're not going to buy what you are selling anymore, unless you do follow the science, it's a more persuasive conversation. Have you had any luck? Because that's the real root of the problem. If they would begin teaching, teachers would be prepared. They would be prepared in the classroom. Districts wouldn't have to pay so much money. Parents wouldn't be having to organize. Kids would learn to read. Are you having any luck going to the root of the problem at the teacher prep programs?
Well, a couple of things. One of the first things that comes to mind is I think teachers are very reliant on resources because they feel like they're lacking the knowledge. And resources don't teach kids. Knowledgeable teachers teach children to read. And so we have websites called Teachers Pay Teachers, and we have Pinterest, and we have all these cutesy activities that are time filler-inners. They're not helping kids learn to read. They're not helping kids learn to write. We're seeing self-regulation difficulties as a result of boredom or as a result of not understanding what they have to do. And so if someone presents me with a resource, I have the knowledge now and the critical thinking skills to say, this actually doesn't align with what I was trained. But unfortunately, if our teacher training programs are not effectively training teachers, we are going to have teachers overly reliant on resources. And that's not okay. And as a second language teacher myself, we have very, very, very limited resources available to us that align with the reading research in French. However, I have been effectively teaching students who are low and weak, struggling readers to read without any sophisticated resources. You don't have to spend half of your paycheck to get kids to learn to read. And so I feel like often teachers are looking for the magic bullet, or they're looking for the silver bullet. What can I buy? And I think one of my pinned Twitter posts is, you can't buy the science of reading. You can't buy structured literacy. It's not a program. It's not something where you turn to day 3 and you teach day 3, and you turn to day 6 and you teach day 6. It is a multifaceted approach. And the only way you're going to be able to teach all the strands in Scarborough's reading rope is if you know what they are, why they're important, and how to do it. It's that what, why, and how. And if they're not learning those strands and responding to your instruction, you have to rely on your knowledge. Because far too often I see teachers and whole districts buying expensive programs and then saying, oh, Kim, it's not working. Well, of course it's not working. You're reading a script and you're maybe not following the script as faithfully as you need to, and you're not necessarily responding to your learners. But you can't do that if you're relying too much on a certain program. And to answer part B of the question, I have spent the majority of the last 4 years trying to help the teachers in my school support the parents and caregivers any way that I can to support their child through public education and not have to rely on private services, because I have a lot of difficulty with that given the population of my school community. But for the last year or so, I've been trying to get to the root of the problem, which is the faculties of education. And I've had to do that carefully and cautiously. And I now tend to respond to people who want my help. I have gone banging on doors, and sometimes that backfires on me. So now what I try to do is share what I'm doing. And I feel like Alicia Smith, who is president of Dyslexia Canada, she has often said, you catch more flies with honey. And so I've tried to take more of an approach where I'm saying, this is what I'm doing in the classroom, and I would love to share it with more teachers. This aligns with the reading research. This aligns with our Ontario Human Rights Commission's Right to Read report. This aligns with our new Ontario curriculum. Who's not going to say, yes, I would like help with that? And so I am cautiously and carefully trying to approach some faculties of education, because I think sometimes we think of a faculty of education or a teacher service program as being one entity, but there are some outliers sometimes, and we need to find them and we need to support them, because we do have faculties of education in Ontario who are making some great changes, but it may not be throughout the entire faculty. It may be just in pockets. And so I try and seize those opportunities every chance I get.
Well, and I wish we had the luxury of only working with people who wanted to see the light. You know, parents are in that bind, and I'm correct in assuming that you do not have a dyslexic child or a struggling reader personally.
My two girls are not dyslexic. However, I am always very careful to say they would have benefited from a structured literacy approach.
Yeah, and every child would. But as a parent of a dyslexic child, you're forced to do something. You've got to do something to save your kid. And so we started out very sweet with lots of honey. And then we found coming together as a parent group and leveraging our power, electoral, legal, really worked. But the other thing that we found was that initially you think that the teachers actually know about the science of reading and they're withholding it from your kids somehow because you assume they're the experts. And so it's so refreshing to me to confirm over and over again that the teachers are also being shortchanged when they're not being trained properly, because that gives us an opportunity as parents who are being shortchanged because our children aren't learning to read. We can actually link arms with teachers. And we have, so many of our parent groups have, you get all the parents who have struggling readers, dyslexic or not. I mean, we can all use structured literacy. But then there are teachers, administrators who will support the group or help the groups covertly sometimes. But it's, it can be very valuable because as a parent, you feel like you're fighting the system, when in fact, you want teachers to be well prepared, and they should be well prepared.
Absolutely. So some of the work that I did earlier on, primarily during COVID, when the schools really were looking quite differently, I went into my local university, which is here in Kingston, Ontario, and I spoke with some of the professors that I had worked with during my master's. And I said, listen, I would really like to offer our pre-service teachers information I wish I had had when I was here in 2000. So with the help of an amazing librarian, of all people, the amazing librarian at the Faculty of Education, she said, Kim, I will offer you this space. I will send out emails. And I recruited 25 pre-service teachers who came outside of their teaching or outside of their course hours. They came on Monday nights from 6 to 8. We were in the library, and over the course of 12 weeks, from September until the end of November, I offered 2 hours a week, no fee. It was just because I loved doing this. And I taught them the basics of decoding and phonemic awareness, how to screen students who may be at risk of reading difficulties, the importance of phonemic awareness, especially the blending and segmenting, and how to help the students who struggle with it. Because it's very easy to say, oh, this kid can't do it. Well, then teach them, right? And also dismantling some of the myths that students who learn who struggle to read can learn how to read when taught how. Because I think I don't know how this myth and this belief system started, but students with dyslexia are bright. They are so capable, and they should not necessarily be in special education. They can learn to read when given the instruction that they need. And also, it is so, for me, it's crystal clear that they can learn to read because every time they go to a private tutor, they come back as readers. So clearly, unless they have some magical unicorn and wand, they can learn to read when they're receiving the instruction. And I've always wanted to take that, what I call the, private service instruction, magic, bring that Orton-Gillingham magic into the public system. Because the majority of my students at my school, which is a very colorful, diverse school, the majority of them can't afford a $75 an hour Orton-Gillingham trained tutor. And to me, it seems so unfair that a third of the population who struggle to read could afford private Orton-Gillingham training, while the other 2/3 of struggling readers relied on me. And so I had to bring that reading, I call it the reading clinic, because that's what we have here in Kingston, the reading clinic magic into the public sector. So I wanted to train these pre-service teachers so that they weren't referring struggling readers to private services. Because if we're talking equity, that is not equitable at all. And we're always talking equity, but if we're talking equity, at the heart of equity is literacy. And if we're not teaching kids how to read, well, then there's something inequitable about that. We need to make sure that we are changing our instruction so we are not relying on these private services, because not all students have access to them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I was also very appreciative that you mentioned we made our documentary for parents. We wanted to inspire, to educate, and then activate parents. But I was really excited to hear that you used it with the pre-service teachers.
That was a game changer. And I'll be honest with you, and I'm putting it out there, I hadn't planned to show it. It hadn't been in my syllabus, but it was very clear from the beginning that some of the teachers in this program where I was teaching were not convinced that a change to our instruction was what the kids needed. And we had a very different view on what inclusion looks like. And so here in Ontario and here across Canada, we're very inclusion oriented. And I don't know how to say this in any other way, but inclusion has to be more than including. We can't just include. Because if we think about it like a public pool, right? If we think about access to public recreation centers and public pools, yes, they are inclusive, but we can't put someone who has mobility issues and throw them in the deep end. We can't have someone who is a non-swimmer. We have to have structures in place, and we have to have accommodations, and we have to have instructors who know how to help them. And so with this inclusion model that's happening across Canada, and I think across the United States too, we are including, but not offering the essential supports needed for them to feel included and to have the skills to be included. And so what's happening is we have teachers who are teaching harder, longer, and are more exhausted than ever before. But if we aren't trained how to help those students now within an inclusion model, they're going to drown. They're going to, or just as bad, they're going to float. They're not going to get better. They're not going to get stronger. They're just going to float across until they graduate. Mm-hmm. And then we have some who are sinking. And so we have to really look at the inclusion model. And one of the reasons I loved our Dyslexic Children was because, for a few reasons. Number one, it was so clear that your daughter desperately wanted to learn to read and was so aware of the fact that the others in her class were reading and she couldn't. She was included. You could never say your daughter wasn't included. She was included. Did she feel included? Absolutely not, because she didn't have access to the reading material. So here's a perfect example of your daughter being included, but it's not enough. She was drowning. And so were other students in the classroom. And so I think in the definition of inclusion, we have to include the skills required to succeed. And to have the skills required to succeed, you have to have teachers who are knowledgeable to give them the skills required to succeed. And so our Dyslexic Children really helped. Doesn't matter how loud I say it. Sometimes the louder I speak, the less people hear me, but showing them really was the time I saw the light bulbs go off. They watched that movie and they thought, oh my gosh, that reminds me of so-and-so in my school. That reminds me. And during silent reading, they're not reading because they can't. And so it opened up a lot of discussion about the value of independent silent reading for 20 minutes, 5 days a week for those who can't decode. And so I think Our Dyslexic Children is certainly, I recommend it to every single parent who has a child, not just with dyslexia, but who struggles to read, so that they know they're not alone. But also I'm showing it to pre-service teachers and to teachers in teacher training programs so that they understand that the instruction really is the magic, and that inclusion needs to mean more, needs to look different than just including. And so really, I think that was a turning point in my course. I hate to use the word buy-in, but I do feel like I got more buy-in after I showed that film. And if I do have the privilege of teaching this course again, I will be starting with your film. Because even those teachers in the program who got it, you can never hear it enough that we are not meeting all students' right to read. And so watching that film helped people who didn't understand, and those who did understand, it emphasized the importance of evidence-based, explicit, systematic instruction for children like your daughter, who are bright and have so much potential, and we were failing to help her meet her maximum potential.
And we intentionally, our producer, Kita Mascaro, was very serious about including the children in their stories to really, really help people understand how significant it was. Because there's, this opposing view, and a lot of the teacher prep programs kind of say dyslexia is not real, the kid's not trying. There's a whole shame and blame that you put on the child and the family. And so I'm very pleased that it was received well and that it helped you convince teachers that moving to the structured literacy is really, really important. So we're excited that you did that. Thank you.
Well, I hope other faculties of education and teacher service programs use the documentary as well, because teachers need to know the why. Because if we're just going into faculties of education and teacher training programs, telling them what they need to teach without the why, it's not going to stick. They need to understand the why, and our kids are more than a number. We can look at the data. We see, 2/3 of the kids or 1/3 are not graduating proficiently literate. That's a number. But when you see a child crying, 1% is too much. Right? 1%, let alone 33%. So we have to put a face and a name to those numbers for it to resonate with people.
Well, then it did its job. So I'm so glad. Yeah. We're working right now with the colleges of education here in Ohio. They're being audited by the state to ensure that we have legislation to move to the science of reading. And they are now being required to move, and they are being audited to make sure that they are moving. And so,
great.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. We're hoping, because Ohio kind of has an outsized effect on the nation and really internationally, because a lot of the stuff coming out of there is used worldwide, like reading recovery, Fonte Simple. So we're hoping to get them into shape. Let me ask some questions.
Can I, before you go on to the next question, can I just say one other thing too? I just want, for anyone who is teaching in a pre-service teaching program, I'm the first to say, I don't know everything. I have so much more to learn. And so I am so incredibly grateful for the experts who came into my class virtually to share their expertise. So I had a speech and language pathologist, Stacy Rickman, come in, and she shared the importance of language, oral language, and DLD. The majority of the people in my class at Vancouver Island University had never heard of DLD. Well, we need to be just as aware of DLD as we are dyslexia, because 1 in 14 kids has DLD. So, and Tiffany Hogan has presented for the class before talking about screening for language disabilities and language difficulties, because we're talking about screening students for dyslexia. But if you know the simple view of reading, there's a other whole component of reading comprehension, and we seem to be neglecting that. And don't get me wrong, we need to screen for dyslexia, but we need to screen for DLD as well. And we can't let the pendulum swing and think decoding, because what I'm seeing in a second language program with multicultural and multi-language learners is they're becoming very good decoders, but they have no clue what they're reading. They have no language comprehension. So they sound like proficient readers, but they don't have any of that oral language or that vocabulary to even know what they're reading. So I do want to give a huge thank you to, Natalie Wexler and Tiffany Hogan and Molly Ness, who came to talk about, the importance of language comprehension as well as the importance of word recognition.
Well, just as you said that science of reading is not a program, it's not again, as someone kind of with a scientific background, continuous improvement is the norm. That's just what happens. So you never assume that you're going to learn one thing and that's it, then you're done. You are always improving the process. You're always learning more. You're always honing your craft. So change and learning more is the constant. So it makes sense to me that, we had OG and now we're going to move. There are other things that we need to learn about, like speech to print. And then we need to talk about comprehension. We need to talk about writing. And those fields are always improving. And that's why being a teacher would be so exciting, because you'd be learning all the time. I don't know that the education system, for current teachers is set up to do that, maybe like a paradigm shift, because I also don't know that we value teachers as much as we should. It is outside of like curing cancer, teaching kids to read is maybe the most important thing, because that's the first skill for the rest of their life.
Absolutely. So, but again, our faculties of education, our teacher training programs have a lot to do with teacher success. And maybe teachers aren't getting the credit they deserve because they're not getting the training they deserve. And if teachers had more effective training, then it would be a more well-respected profession. And right now, across Canada, we have such a high rate of attrition. So many teachers are leaving the profession that we have non-teachers coming in and teaching the classes. Well, what does that do for the credibility of the profession? If we have a 19-year-old who is, right out of high school to fill a classroom of grade 6 students, that really doesn't help with the credibility of the profession. And so nothing has a very simple answer, but I think we do need to start with faculties of education, improve the quality of teacher training programs, and reach out to the experts in the area. We need to leave our own egos at the door and say, I actually don't know a lot about language. I didn't get it in my teacher training. Oh, wait a second. I have some friends who are speech and language pathologists. They dedicated their whole career to this. Let's bring them in. And so I don't have any pride. I know that I don't know everything, but I certainly can learn from some of these experts. And so that's why I think it's really important for our faculties of education to really draw from the experts in the field.
I go to conferences all the time. I listen to Tiffany Hogan at Big Sky. Just got back. And I'd never even heard of DLD. And they did an entire day on DLD. And she spoke along, I don't see colleges of education sending their professors to these meetings. Not very many. I don't see a lot of district administrators at that meeting. And so I would agree with you wholeheartedly that all the way up the line, we need to be engaged with learning. Because like I said, as a parent or really now I call myself an education reformer, because all different areas, wherever I can help, we're helping. But I am learning and all the time, because like you said, the more you know, the more you know you don't know.
Right.
And there's so much more to learn.
Unfortunately, teachers, though, I think are burning out because they know what they don't know, but they don't have the time or energy to find the answers. And sometimes when we go to the consultants, they don't have the answers. Well, they're a product of the same system we're from. So it really is, again, probably an overused cliche, but the blind leading the blind. And if we're all graduating from a faculty of education that is not teaching us the reading research we should know, and the approach that is the explicit, systematic, diagnostic, multi-sensory approach that works best for 97% of learners, then we're just going in circles. And I'm in a very privileged position where I work part-time. Ever since I had my 2 children, I have been on a reduced workload. So I do have the time to dig deeper. I mean, you can spend your time any way you want. I choose to spend my time reading, I'm trying to find some names here, reading Louisa Moat's speech to print. But that's my choice. I choose to spend the time I'm not in the classroom, but then I'm also choosing to share what I've learned with the other teachers at my school, because it's not going to be helpful if it's siloed and I'm the only person who has it. And in fact, the chief commissioner of the OHRC's Right to Read report, she's quoted saying, knowledge is power, but only if it's shared. And I am one of the very few teachers at my school who has the privilege of working part-time. Well, I want to pay it forward. If I have just read a phenomenal book and I have all these great takeaways that we can use in all 18 of our classrooms at my school, then of course I'm going to share it. And there's so many ways we can share it, but we have to be creative, because we certainly don't have the supply teachers to come in and replace teachers. We don't even have enough homeroom teachers, let alone teachers to replace teachers. So, I do recognize just how lucky I am to have the time to find the answers for the questions I have. But I don't think there's a teacher out there who thinks they know everything. The problem is they don't have the time or the network of people to find the answers. And that's taken me a lot of time to find that network of people who have the answers, because we are just going in circles for too many years.
Yes. Well, and again, the parent answer that we have found to be successful: form a parent group, work with your district to let them see the light, help them figure out structured literacy, and then have them go to the colleges of education that supply them and apply back pressure for them to move to the science. And we're actually seeing some movement, because that's where it all starts, and that would at least get us going in the right direction.
Well, that's very interesting you would say that, because we just celebrated the 2-year anniversary. It looks like I'm like collecting royalties for this or something, and I'm not. But we just celebrated the 2-year anniversary of the release of the Ontario Human Rights Right to Read report, and it was given a report card. And one of the lowest grades, well, no, I'm going to start with the highest. One of the highest grades was, we have made a lot of progress in terms of curriculum development. We now have a new language curriculum that is evidence-based and aligns with the most current reading research. So that's great. Yay, Ontario. We also mandated screening this September. So 3 weeks ago, teachers began screening students for risk of reading difficulties, primarily word recognition. We're not yet there for language comprehension, and that's okay. But the lowest score was in our faculties of education, was in our pre-service teacher programs. We have made little, if no, progress at all. Now, I'm very fortunate that I am working in a faculty of education right now, but it's not in Ontario. It's in British Columbia. So, we do have some work ahead of us if we're going to move that train forward a little bit.
What curriculum are you using? You said you're using one that's
Good question.
So what are you using? Just say it, get it out.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
The governments.
Oh, wow.
Yes. So we have a Ministry of Education who creates the curriculum. And so every province across Ontario, and The territories, I'm not 100% sure. I think they borrow from one of the provinces, but I am not 100% sure of that. I am working the Northwest Territories, and I know right now that they are borrowing in other provinces. That's why I say that. But we have a team of ministers of education and other stakeholders, some retired teachers, retired principals, who are in fact responsible for writing our curriculum. Now, driving the ship, thankfully, is Alicia Smith and Una Malcolm from IDA Ontario. And so they were heavily involved, would be an understatement, in assuring that what the Ontario Ministry of Education came out with actually did align with the reading research. So there were a number of revisions, and I was one of the team. I was one person on a team of content contributors for the new curriculum. So they recognized in the OHRC's Right to Read report, they said we need to be out with the old Ministry of Education curriculum, in with the new Ontario Ministry of Education curriculum, getting rid of the 3 queuing process, no more leveled readers, making sure that students are receiving explicit phonemic awareness instruction along a continuum of skills and complexity. And I worked with this team as a content contributor. However, at the end of the day, it was the Ontario Ministry who decided what went in the curriculum.
How often do you update that?
Well, the last one I think was, I could be wrong, I think it was about 13 years old.
Seems like there would need to be a mechanism, though, to keep it, now that you're thinking more about comprehension and writing and these other things that you need to include. Is there a mechanism to continue to update the curriculum?
I think it's on teachers and on districts to make sure that we are aligning our instruction with the curriculum, but also supplementing when need be. If something is not in the curriculum, then we need to use our knowledge, if we have it, to make sure that students are receiving what they need. And also our current, it was released in September 2022, it was released. No, that was the OHRC's. Yes, it was. I'm losing track of time now. But that was for the English program, and we have yet to see one for our French second language learners, our FSL program. That curriculum has not yet been revised, and it is now very much based on a belief system and not the reading research in terms of how second language learners learn to read. So that also needs some revising.
That brings up the point. We've done some work in Illinois and trying to get the whole state to be able to come to agreement on some legislation. And English as a second language or English language learners, primarily Hispanic students, the families and the organizations that advocate for them were not very excited. There was some controversy over whether or not structured literacy was good for all students. What is your read on that for French English language learners?
Well, like everything I share, it's not, and I'm only saying this because I want to be careful with my words, it's not based on what I think, but the reading research says, and it's outlined in the defining guide by the Reading League Journal, that a structured literacy approach is essential for all learners, but it is particularly important for our multilingual, second language, additional language, whatever term you want to use, learners who do not have those oral language skills at home. And so if you are learning in a language of instruction that is different from your language at home, you really need that oral language foundation. So in terms of how the science of reading or the reading research differs for monolingual learners versus multilingual learners, our monolingual learners are coming to school already with a solid lexicon, a solid mental dictionary of vocabulary words that they can draw upon for reading comprehension and for understanding language. Whereas our multilingual learners and our French immersion students, when they come in the door, they have zero 0 words. So when I say, okay, mes amis, vas-y au tapis, they look at you just like little deer in headlights. What do you need? What do you need? But if I said, okay, boys, okay, friends, I said, okay, friends, let's go to the carpet, then of course they would know what to do. Whether or not they would do it is another issue, but they would at least understand. But our multilingual learners don't have that language base. So we need to form that language base. And I often think of Margie Gillis and her wheel of reading and writing. And at the center is oral language. And often people don't even look at that. They look at the surround. Oh, I have to teach morphology. Oh, I have to teach phonology. Oh, I have to teach vocabulary and background knowledge. But whoa, wait a second. They don't have that solid foundation yet. And so often I think of it as like one of those Velcro paddles. My girls had them on the beach. It was like this little Velcro paddle and you throw a tennis ball and it sticks. Sometimes I see that oral language being the Velcro. And when you do the phonemic awareness, it's going to stick. And you can do phonemic awareness without that solid language, but it's not going to stick as much as if it is in their if they have that oral language foundation.
Well, and what I say is like with the simple view of reading, first you have to be able to decode the word. But if you can decode kayak, but you don't know what a kayak is, then it does you no good. So you're lost.
Simply decoding. That's right.
Yeah.
And in fact, I became a proficient decoder when I lived in Mexico. I lived in Mexico and I taught at an American school actually for 3 years in the north of Mexico. It was beautiful, lots of mountains, no beaches. And I learned to decode very quickly because it's a very transparent language.
Yeah.
As soon as they told me the letter J says and the letter, B says v, I learned to decode very quickly, but I had no idea what I was reading. No clue. And my brain would often go to French or my brain would jump to English. So I was reading the word gâteau, G-A-T-O, gâteau. Well, in French, it means cake. But in Spanish, it means cat. Mm-hmm. And so you have to be very careful because if you're using the word in context, you don't want to say you're eating the cat when you actually mean you're eating the cake. So we have to do more than teach our students to decode. Decoding is key, but also building that oral language. Because I remember when I was learning French as a second language, and I would say to the teacher, oh, how do you is that correct? And she said, well, what does it sound right? Well, I don't know if it sounds right or not because I've never heard this word, right? And so it only sounds right if you have that word in your lexicon. So by creating a solid oral language foundation for our multilingual learners, they will know if they're pronouncing a word correctly or not. They'll know if they're saying the syllable on the right, place in the syllable or in the word. So that oral language, and that's something we take for granted as proficient speakers ourselves. And only when teachers try to learn another language, whether it be German or Spanish or Italian, do you truly understand just how difficult it actually is.
And so do you, just to get them used to, that's fascinating. Unfortunately, in the States, we do not do a second language until like 6th or 7th grade after their brains, we should be doing it right away so that they hear it. And but you'd have to, if they're not hearing that at home at all, are you reading to them just to get them just to hear it, but then also translating for them and doing vocabulary building? It would be tremendous.
So the brain is most malleable for spoken language in the early years. And our kindergarten program starts when students are as young as 3. So they do 2 years of kindergarten, which is junior kindergarten, senior kindergarten. If they are a September, October, November, or December baby, some of them are 3 when they come in, and it's a 2-year program. And that 2-year program really is designed to build oral language, the French immersion program that is, to build oral language skills in a play-based setting. However, a play-based setting is usually interpreted as they are working independently. Students who are working independently without an expert are not going to learn a new language. So when I lived in France, I went to France for a year on a student exchange. They put me in residence with all the other non-French speaking Canadians, the non-French speaking Spaniards, and the Italians. Well, for a whole year, I was living with other people who were there to learn French, but we didn't have any experts. So I'm not blaming the system for my French, but we really do need to make sure that we are teaching language from an expert using explicit, systematic, and correct pronunciation too, because in the kindergarten program, they are going to accelerate their French if they're getting instruction from someone who speaks French. But they're not going to accelerate their French speaking with other 3-year-olds who only speak English. To me, it's just common sense. So in the play-based setting, we really do need to embed lots of oral language activities that are led and directed by a teacher or an expert in the room, and then give them the scaffolding so they can use some of that language and vocabulary in their independent groups. But a play-based model really doesn't work very well for if the whole class is English and they're expected to learn French.
That does make perfect sense.
It does. To me, it makes perfect sense. Now, it would be different if there was a minority of multilingual learners in a majority class of English speakers. And we've had that too. So in an English school, for example, where the English the language of instruction is English, if we have a couple of students who have come over from Syria, listening to their peers, listening to the teacher, they will acquire the spoken language of English. But in the French immersion setting, none of them speak French. So they're not hearing any French, and you can't speak it if you don't have the words that are taught to you by an expert. So, and again, I like to think of that example when I was in France. I learned my French from Italians and Spaniards who didn't speak French.
So your accent wasn't the best at that point. Yeah.
Oh, no. Still working on it.
Well, my brain never worked. I went to Greece for a summer after I had taken Spanish. And somehow when I did that, my brain is either English or another language. It doesn't have a slot for each one.
Right.
So I don't know if that's, I don't know what language I speak, but I never could get beyond one. But I admire people who can pick up languages. And I do think we do a disservice to our children by starting so late. We hamstring them. And I think the Canadian model, I much prefer.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Now
So
we just need to get the expert teachers in to teach it too.
Well, there's so much we could do. And I don't want to go much more. I promised you an hour. But every time I hear you on your little videos or now, I don't even know if we've ever met in person. Have we ever met in person?
Not in person, no, but we did meet through our mutual friends, Melissa and Lori, on a video call, but not in person, unfortunately. I'll have to make my way down to the States very soon.
Yeah, we're going to have to get to some conference together. But I always think whenever I'm with you, your children are so lucky. And if we could clone you, it would, it's one of the benefits of my job is getting to meet really, really good people, good teachers, and good people who keep moving this work forward. So we can't thank you enough for your work.
Well, thank you. And yeah, no, that is the greatest compliment I've ever had. And I can't thank you enough too, because I really did feel alone until I joined social media. It's a very lonely journey. And you as a parent with a child who's struggling to learn to read and you know she's intelligent, it's lonely as a parent, but it can also be very lonely as a teacher too. So thank you.
Well, and that's a group that we had not originally intended to help. But again, as you say, doing this work, I am finding that that we can partner with teachers as well. So we do oftentimes close with any advice that you might have for a parent. That's our primary audience. Is there anything you want to leave parents with before we get off the phone or the call?
I'm sure many of your other guests have said the same thing, but trust your instincts. I truly believe that parents know their children best. And if your gut's telling you your child is struggling, go with it. Because sometimes as a teacher in the classroom, I don't always see what the parents see. And I know, I hope I don't tear up when I say this, but I know that some of my dyslexic students are those who are working harder than anyone else, and they're holding it together. And then they go home and they melt down, they collapse. And that can look very different for very different families. But, if you see your child collapsing because school is so hard and they're trying so hard to keep up and they can't, please come and talk to me. Come and talk to the teacher, because we don't always see that side, because they are showing us their best. They don't want their teacher to know that they don't understand or that they're not able to read the words off the page. So trust your instincts. And also, I always recommend to the parents in my school community the Handbook for Families from the International Dyslexia Association. They have an amazing handbook for families. And so I've actually created a bulletin board of resources for families, and I've created a QR code for each one of those resources. And right in the middle is the Handbook for Families to support your struggling reader. And it doesn't have to be after a dyslexia diagnosis. Ideally, it would be the early signs. And if you don't know what the early signs are, even more reason to download that handbook. So trust your instincts and educate yourself, because I think parents and caregivers have to be their child's strongest advocate. And hopefully your child's teacher is too.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. And we will link that in the show notes. Everything. You've done some really creative things with pairings of podcasts and books and cocktails, and you're just a wealth of information. So we'll put all of this in the show notes. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. And thank you so much for having me on your show. I love it so much. And I will continue to show your documentary every opportunity I can here in Kingston, as well as at Vancouver Island University.
Thank you.
Literacy Now is a podcast designed specifically for parents in our effort to ensure every child learns to read. Parents deserve a seat at the table, and we bring their voices to the fore. We invite you to join the Parents for Reading Justice community on all of our socials, and make sure to visit our website to watch our documentary and to take our masterclass. All of our content is free of charge, because every child deserves to learn to read. This episode was brought to you by parentsforreadingjustice.org, produced by Brett Tingley and Keita Mascaro.